Welcome to A New Capitalism, the podcast that will show you how you can invest your money to help create a more just and prosperous economy for all. Here's Frank Altman.
My guest this week is Sean Sherman. Sean is a chef, activist, and advocate for indigenous food systems. He is the founder of Natives, a nonprofit that supports and promotes indigenous food sovereignty, and Awamni, Minnesota's first full-service indigenous restaurant. Sean is a member of the Oglala Lakota tribe, and his work focuses on the revitalization and evolution of indigenous foodways throughout North America. Sean, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate your taking time with me.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
There's been a lot of press, I've eaten a lot of your food recently, and I really enjoy what you're trying to do. But maybe before we jump into the details of your social ventures and how you're trying to transform the food system, tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to be a chef, what's motivating you in this effort around native foods.
So I was born and raised on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I'm enrolled with the Oglala Lakota Sioux tribe. My mom moved us off the reservation right before I started high school, and I started working in restaurants when I was about 13 years old. And I just worked restaurants all through high school, all through college. And after college, I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and just worked my way up into a chef career at a really young age. So I was an executive chef by the time I was about 27, and just, had a pretty good young chef career. I didn't go to school for it. I just worked really hard and just had a good work ethic, a good eye for plates, read a lot back when people used to read a lot of books, and just worked, got to where I needed to be. But it was a few years into that chef career that I just had the epiphany of just realizing the complete absence of indigenous foods out there. There were no native restaurants. I couldn't really name any native chefs when I started first looking around. And there was very little information out there. And the cookbooks that were out there just really weren't speaking to me, because I really wanted to know, what were my ancestors eating? What were they harvesting? What was their knowledge of wild foods? What were those flavor profiles like? What were the cooking techniques, food preservation techniques? Where were we getting salts and fats and sugars? And I just started researching, and filling it all up. And after a few years of that research, I started practicing doing some of this work that I'm doing now, with just trying to feature what are modern indigenous foods, utilizing a lot of that knowledge from the past.
We're talking about my recent book, A New Capitalism, Creating a Just Economy That Works for All. Could you give me a sense of how you see the work that you're doing fitting into that kind of overall effort to create a more just economy?
Absolutely. So I look at I started identifying problems that I saw, especially in tribal communities and what I grew up with. A lot of that's centered around food. And so when I was growing up on Pine Ridge in the 70s and early 80s, there were no restaurants on the reservation. And it's a large reservation. It's the third largest reservation in the United States. And we had one grocery store that serviced an area about the size of Connecticut. And there's very little food access, and the unemployment rates were sky high. There was very few businesses even on the reservation. And, my dad had started a nonprofit called Lakota Fund that started doing microloans way back when, and they were one of the first ones to do that. And that really helped grow some more businesses. But as I grew up and became a chef and realizing that a lot of this stuff has not changed, there's high unemployment. There's a lot of need of people surviving off of commodity food program foods, just like I did. And I started and there just was very little information as to what were even Native American foods. And even though I grew up in a tribal community, we had very little access to anything that was our own foods, basically. And I started questioning that because I looked at history and I started deep diving into history and understanding why these things happen. And as Lakota, we were still battling the U.S. government until the 1890s. So why within less than a century did we lose so much knowledge? What were our food systems and where did that knowledge go? So for me, piecing that back together, I started doing these foods. They started taking off. I created a philosophy of just trying to showcase what modern indigenous foods are by removing colonial ingredients. So taking away dairy and wheat flour and cane sugar and beef and pork and chicken, and creating businesses around that. So starting a food truck venture with that model, starting a catering company with that model, and eventually working towards the restaurant, which opened up in 21. And before that, I saw the need for moving into a nonprofit situation because philanthropy was going to be probably a better vehicle to actually get some of this work out there. So I started Natives, which is North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems, NATIFS. And under Natives, we have Indigenous Food Lab, which is a market space in Minneapolis where people can find up to 40 different Indigenous food producers. We have a classroom studio where we're going to be pumping out a ton of videos on Indigenous-focused education, which is non-Eurocentric focused curriculum and education. We have a production kitchen where we're creating products, and we're also just utilizing ourselves as a development center so we can train other culinary people, other business people, especially Indigenous entrepreneurs. And we also just pushed the restaurant into the nonprofit. So the restaurant we're using as a tool because the restaurant creates a lot of jobs. We have over 120 employees there at our height in the summertime. And we're just pushing tens of thousands of dollars of Indigenous food products through the restaurant because that's part of our philosophy. That's part of what we do by prioritizing Indigenous food productions first and buying directly from Indigenous food producers. So pushing that money directly into that and helping to raise a demand around these Indigenous foods and raise an awareness to them, and creating a space where the public can come literally see and experience, and we can talk about things. It gives us an opportunity, gives us a stage to talk about things. So our model is basically set up to work on food distribution and education distribution. So since we have this regional center point now with Indigenous Food Lab and the restaurant, our goal is to reach around us in our region and work with tribal communities and Indigenous entrepreneurs, help to develop them, help the tribal communities develop healthy food operations, help get some of these foods directly into schools, help raise the demand of Indigenous foods and move these products back and forth as we create smaller entities of these market spaces, even down to just like getting some tribal convenience stores to give up a shelf of chips and putting a shelf of Indigenous food products. And we're doing this all through the nonprofit so we can subsidize some of those costs as we do those programs. And then replicating this whole model. So next year, we're getting ready to move into Bozeman, Montana to become a regional center point there. So we'll open up a food lab and it'll have the market space, it'll have a classroom situation, it'll have a production kitchen, and eventually we'll open up some kind of restaurant situation, which will create the jobs and move the foods and create the space. And my model is putting those in really high dense touristy areas. So like in Bozeman, I could open in a place like West Yellowstone, which is a little tourist trap on the edge of Yellowstone Park. Millions and millions and millions of dollars goes through that little tiny town. And we can tap into those tourism dollars to help it like become a capital machine for us, for all the programming and everything that we're doing. And doing this everywhere. So we're planting seeds to do the same work up in Anchorage, out on Honolulu and Oahu, in Rapid City, South Dakota, around the Black Hills where I grew up, Oklahoma and beyond. So we built this model to replicate, to create distribution points, to help spread education, to help spread awareness, to help move Indigenous food products, to help raise that demand, and to help influence people how to eat healthier, since our food is really healthy. We're gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, soy-free, pork-free, all these things. It's a really wonderful food base. And, and we're just going to pump out more stuff, like more cookbooks. There's another one in the works, for example.
So as you describe all this, I have to admit that it's getting close to dinner time and I'm getting very hungry. A couple of things I want to just add for people listening to this, because I talk in the book quite a bit about Community Reinvestment Fund, the organization that I founded and led until recently. You're the food lab, and you have a spirit kitchen. I think that's what the kitchen is called, where people can actually buy food and get takeout and so forth. That's located in the Midtown Global Marketplace on Lake Street. For folks who know the Twin Cities, Lake Street is a resurgent area. Unfortunately, it was the locus of a lot of the civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd. So, but it came through. It came through well. And I just want to say that that building that you're in, CRF was a major financer of that building, together with other community development financial institutions that used an important tool called the Federal New Markets Tax Credit that really enabled that building, which had more than 1 million square feet, stood empty for well over a decade, open to the wind, a big problem in the community. And we were able to turn into an asset. The global marketplace showcases a lot of different foods from around the world, basically, and representing many of the recent immigrants that are living in the Twin Cities and selling not only great food but also other products. So, how does being located in that global marketplace further your vision?
I think it's a great fit, and we do a lot of work with Midtown Global Market and their nonprofit arm, NDC, which is Neighborhood Development Corporation. And, it just really fits in with what their values are and what our values are. And we wanted to be really close to the urban native population, which isn't too far from us in South Minneapolis, too. which is like the Little Earth community and
Right.
the Franklin corridor. And so it all fits in perfectly. And, and it was a trying time because like we moved in there in January of 2020, right in front of the pandemic. And then so first we sat aside and waited as everybody did at the beginning of the pandemic. And then George Floyd got murdered just 8 blocks south of us. And that changed everything. So we moved back in, opened up our work again, and we started doing food relief. And we are sending food not only all across the city, especially to homeless encampments and people that really needed food during a really trying time in our city. But also as the winter came along, we started sending 10,000 meals a week to 9 out of 11 tribes across Minnesota in the style that we do, with just trying to focus and feature Indigenous food products. And after that, then we turned around and opened up a Wamni in July of 21, and we've been sold out ever since.
So let's talk specifically about a Wamni. And first of all, I'd like for people listening to this for you to describe where it is located and why it's named a Wamni.
So we're right on the Mississippi River, downtown Minneapolis, right in the heart of downtown Minneapolis. And where we are, there used to be a really beautiful, picturesque waterfall. It was about 300 feet across and about a 40-foot drop. And in the Dakota language, the waterfall was called Owamni Yamni, which meant place of the falling, swirling water. And people can read a little bit about that on our website at owamni.com. And, so it's a really special and sacred space. And even in the entire Mississippi River in Dakota language is Hahawakpa, or River of the Falls, meaning that one particular waterfall, because that was the only major waterfall on the Mississippi River. Well, that waterfall gets destroyed in the late 1800s because of a lot of the mills that move in during the colonial history. And it was really delicate soils, and there was a lot of drilling of tunnels and pipes and things like that, and just pushing a lot of logs down the river during that time period. And so today we have a lock and dam and a concrete skirting. But just to be on that space, to be in that sacred spot, was really meaningful to us for the business that we created. And we couldn't have picked a better space to really showcase our first brick and mortar of what was possible for modern Indigenous foods.
Yeah, it's an amazing site. And I think many people don't realize the Mississippi River doesn't really have any waterfalls. This is it.
Yes.
Rapids and a few things, but the waterfall was sufficient to power mills. Hence, Minneapolis became the mill city.
And it was such a striking waterfall. People equated it to Niagara Falls when it was like...
Yes. I wish I'd seen it. The area is, in some respects, coming back to Native people, even land. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there's some more organizations out there trying to return some of the spaces. We were the first of this project by the Minneapolis Park Board and Park Board Foundation to activate the river downtown Minneapolis, which really had been more industrial for quite a few, past century, really. And they're trying to make it more accessible. So they put out an RFP back in late 2017, I believe. And we were lucky enough to win that RFP and move in and start getting ready. But we didn't officially open until 21 because it was a massive project. It was a $25 million renovation, basically, that took over some old mill ruin sites and built modern spaces on top of it and created a brand new park in front of the river. And then the pandemic slowed it down for an entire year too. Of course, it got really hard to get things in and to work and to keep on that timeline. But we did get open. We opened up right in the middle of that pandemic. In 21, we were still having vaccine mandates and mask mandates, and all those things were still happening around us as we were opening up this massive restaurant. But we've got a lot of outdoor space, and we're just really happy. And my original vision was to use the restaurant in the nonprofit. And I remember when I was writing out my 501c3 application, and I had to argue with the IRS quite a bit because they said you can't have a restaurant as part of a nonprofit. And I would say, why? They'd say, restaurants make money. And I'd say, no, they don't. They should all be nonprofits. So they eventually gave me my way because I said, it's going to be a place where it's on the job training, which is really valuable. And we're going to have.
It's so interesting to hear this because when CRF was founded, there was no concept even of the idea of social ventures or social entrepreneurs. And so the only way that we could see that this was going to go anywhere was to be a 501c3 nonprofit.
Right.
We applied, and our concept was that we were going to support the liquidity needs of local revolving loan funds, including, by the way, the Lakota Fund.
Oh,
so
yeah.
There's an intergenerational connection here. I've known your father for years.
Yeah, exactly.
And the IRS came back and they said, oh, no, it looks to us like you're going to create a nonprofit Lehman Brothers. And so we had to really explain to them what the law said. And within a week of their saying no, they changed their mind and said yes. But it was interesting to see how difficult it was when you come up with a innovation in the nonprofit and social space that uses the tools of capitalism to support a nonprofit mission. And you're doing the same thing with a restaurant. Obviously, it's a business, but taking the proceeds of the business and pumping them back into a mission-driven nonprofit that's training people, that's spreading the word about healthy foods, working on ending the food deserts that are in many places. Those are all very, very important change-making activities that certainly ought to be supported by philanthropy.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, Sean, let's take a break. But coming up next time on A New Capitalism, we'll continue our conversation with Chef Sean Sherman, who runs an Indigenous-focused restaurant and food lab in Minneapolis. Sean will share more about how employing Indigenous workers impacts the local community and beyond.
We're just creating so many jobs in this particular kind of new sector that just didn't exist. There wasn't really a native food sector out there, and so we have 120 employees during the summertime at Awamni. 70% of the staff there identifies as Indigenous. We've got close to 50 employees at the nonprofit just a few blocks south of there at the Midtown Global Market. So we can be up to 170 employees. We just started. We're just a few years old, really, when it comes down to it. And I've been doing the work since 2014 when I first formed the sous chef a long time ago, but we've come a long way since then.
This has been A New Capitalism with Frank Altman. If you'd like to connect with Frank and join the movement to create a new capitalism that works for all, go to frankaltman.com. Frank's book is available on print, audio, and ebook formats on all major book-selling sites. A New Capitalism is a production of Forbes Books.